Her Majesty was our longest ever reigning monarch, so it's no surprise that she had a record number of prime ministers, 12 men and 3 women, all of them major figures in our national life, but all of them deeply respectful of the woman they served.
It was an enormous privilege. It was one of the great privileges of the job to spend time every week with, someone who was the world's greatest public servant with all that experience. And I think it was one of my predecessors who said, "You always came out of every meeting feeling 2 inches taller."
It was just a week ago that she appointed her last Prime Minister. 3 days later, Liz Truss found herself leading the tributes.
The United Kingdom is the great country it is today because of her. The Commonwealth is the family of nations it is today because of her.
David Cameron was number 12.
And you were conscious that you were a Prime Minister who would be there for a few years and you would devote yourself to public service. She had been doing this for decades and you were passing through.
At the door of the House of Commons, you find statues and busts of almost all her prime ministers. Some now less well known, some giants of history, such as Winston Churchill. There was a 50-year age gap between the Queen and her first Prime Minister, but all the same they developed a very close relationship with real affection on both sides. The Queen's private secretary wrote of the private weekly audiences the two held that he couldn't hear what they were talking about, but more often than not these audiences were punctuated by peals of laughter, and generally Winston came out wiping his eyes. David Cameron wasn't even born when Elizabeth became Queen.
She had this huge sense of what was right and what was her duty and what needed to be done. But that was always combined with this wonderful sense of humour, this winning smile that she had, this way of putting people at ease. I have lots of wonderful memories. She used to drive phenomenally fast. I remember getting into the car with her in Balmoral to go up to some picnic and driving at breakneck speed.
The convention is any conversation between monarch and Prime Minister is strictly private. Something David Cameron apparently forgot when he was heard saying Her Majesty had purred down the phone after the result of the Scottish independence referendum. Did that cause any awkwardness?
I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed.
Did that cause any awkwardness?
I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed of this stupid remark I'd made. I should have, of course, cameras are always around and microphones are always around. What was I thinking? The next audience, I made a grovelling apology. I was so embarrassed and apologised profusely. And that was that, I hope.
Did you say anything?
If she did, I wouldn't tell you.
Inevitably, her relations with different prime ministers varied. The Queen was always unfailingly correct, but she developed a better rapport with some than with others. The relationship between the Queen and Margaret Thatcher was never warm. The Prime Minister's right-hand man, Willie Whitelaw, said the two women maintained a rigid formality. The ice never broke. But when Margaret Thatcher died, the Queen did break with convention and attended her funeral. She only did that for one of her other Prime Ministers, Churchill. But whatever the personality or even the political party, individual Prime Ministers always found they could be sure of one thing. The Queen would put her duty to the country, the Constitution, the people first.
You knew there were things that she cared deeply about. Not least the success and stability of our country. You knew she cared deeply about the military and our armed forces and veterans, and obviously with something like the referendum on whether Scotland would stay in the United Kingdom. She was very careful never to express a personal political opinion, even as something which was about the future of her realm. She was so correct in her public service and public duty.
God save the King!
At the proclamation of King Charles, all her living prime ministers were present, part of the transition to a new monarch. And already the new king has held an audience with his new prime minister. The monarch has changed, but the vital relationship between head of state and head of government endures. Andy Bell, 5 News.